I still can't believe it happened. One minute, my daughter was fighting for her life in intensive care, clinging to every breath, and the next, I found out her husband, the man who swore to love and cherish her, was out on a yacht, laughing and drinking, completely oblivious to the tragedy unfolding. You might think I overreacted, but I ask you, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? How far would you go to protect your child, especially when someone else's blatant disregard for her life pushed you past your breaking point? Tell me if I was wrong for what I did an hour later, because even now, the memory still burns. It all started so innocently. My daughter, Sarah, had always been the light of my life. A vibrant, intelligent, and incredibly kind young woman, she found love with Mark, a charming but somewhat aloof man she met through work. I had my reservations about Mark from the beginning. He was a bit too smooth, a little too focused on appearances, and I always felt he prioritized his own pleasure over Sarah's well-being. But Sarah was head over heels, and as any parent knows, when your child is happy, you try to put your doubts aside. They got married 3 years ago in a beautiful ceremony, and while I forced a smile, a tiny knot of apprehension remained in my stomach. I wanted to believe in Mark for Sarah's sake. Their life together seemed outwardly perfect. They lived in a lovely house, both had good jobs, and they often went on lavish vacations, funded mostly, I suspected, by Sarah's diligent savings and a surprising inheritance she'd received from her grandmother. Mark, despite his expensive tastes, never seemed to contribute much financially, always making excuses about investments that hadn't paid off or a big deal that was just around the corner. Sarah, ever the optimist, always defended him, saying he was just going through a tough patch. I held my tongue, but I watched. I saw how he'd disappear for hours, sometimes days, with vague explanations about business trips or networking events. Sarah would look wistful, but she never challenged him. She loved him, and that love, I realized later, made her blind. Then came the news that would change everything. Sarah was pregnant. I was overjoyed, of course, absolutely ecstatic at the thought of becoming a grandmother. Sarah was thrilled too, but I noticed a subtle shift in Mark. He wasn't as enthusiastic as I expected. He seemed more preoccupied, often on his phone, muttering about deadlines and clients. He even started going out more frequently, leaving Sarah alone in the evenings, citing important client dinners. Sarah, now exhausted and battling severe morning sickness, tried to make light of it, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. I gently suggested she talk to him, express her feelings, but she just brushed it off, saying he was under a lot of pressure. The pregnancy was difficult. Sarah developed complications, including preeclampsia, which meant constant monitoring and bed rest. Her doctor warned her about the risks, emphasizing the need for absolute calm and minimal stress. Mark, however, continued his routine. He'd visit her at home, sometimes bringing flowers, but his attention always seemed divided. He'd spend more time scrolling on his phone than talking to her, and his business trips continued, even as Sarah's condition worsened. I spent most of my days with Sarah, trying to keep her spirits up, cooking for her, and running errands. I saw firsthand the toll Mark's absence and indifference were taking on her. She was losing weight. Her once bright eyes were now shadowed with worry, and she rarely smiled. One terrifying evening, Sarah collapsed. I rushed her to the hospital, my heart pounding in my chest. The doctors immediately admitted her to intensive care. Her blood pressure had skyrocketed, and both her life and the baby's were in grave danger. It was the most terrifying night of my life. I called Mark repeatedly, leaving frantic voicemails, but there was no answer. I sat by Sarah's bedside, holding her limp hand, tears streaming down my face, praying for her and my unborn grandchild. Hours passed, no Mark. The doctors worked tirelessly, telling me they were doing everything they could. I felt utterly alone, consumed by fear and a simmering rage at Mark's absence. Around 3 a.m., a nurse came to tell me they had stabilized Sarah, but she was still critical. The baby was also in distress, and they were preparing for an emergency delivery. I was a wreck. I tried Mark again, still nothing. I sent a text message, begging him to come, explaining the gravity of the situation. Still no response. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. Where could he possibly be? I decided to check their shared location on Sarah's phone, which she had given me access to in case of an emergency. My hands trembled as I unlocked it. What I saw next made my blood run cold. Mark wasn't on a business trip. He wasn't at a client dinner. His location showed him at a marina, several hours away from the hospital. And not just any marina, but one known for its luxury yachts and vibrant nightlife. I zoomed in on the map, and there it was. A picture he'd posted just an hour earlier on a private social media account I knew he used, but Sarah didn't. He was on a massive yacht, surrounded by scantily clad women, laughing, a drink in his hand, looking like he didn't have a care in the world. My daughter, his wife, was fighting for her life in a hospital bed, and he was partying. The rage I felt was so intense it was physical. It felt like a searing burn in my chest. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. My daughter was in critical condition, needing an emergency C-section to save her and the baby, and her husband was living it up on a yacht. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have confronted him directly? Would you have waited? Or would you have unleashed every ounce of fury you had? I didn't wait. The decision was made the instant I saw that picture. My priority was Sarah and the baby, but a part of me knew I had to make Mark pay. I couldn't bear the thought of him getting away with this, of him continuing to live his carefree life while Sarah suffered. I called my brother, David, who lived nearby and knew about Sarah's condition. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, ex-military, and incredibly protective of his niece. I told him everything, my voice shaking with fury and disbelief. He didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice grim. While David drove, I kept tracking Mark's location. The yacht was still there. I called the marina, feigning concern, and managed to get the name of the yacht he was on the siren. I then called the local police, reporting a stolen vessel. I gave them a detailed description of the siren, and said I had seen someone resembling Mark on board, claiming he had borrowed it without permission from a friend. I knew it was a lie, but I didn't care. I needed to cause chaos, to disrupt his party in the most spectacular way possible. I wasn't just going for inconvenience, I was aiming for public humiliation. David arrived at the hospital, his face etched with concern. I quickly explained my plan. He looked at me, a glimmer of admiration in his eyes. "You go, Mom," he said. "You take care of Sarah, I'll handle Mark." I knew what he meant. He wasn't going to let Mark off easy. He drove to the marina, arriving just as the police boats were approaching the siren. I watched on my phone as Mark, still oblivious, was suddenly surrounded by flashing lights. He looked bewildered, then angry, as officers boarded the yacht. I could almost hear his protests from miles away. The police questioned everyone on board, and of course, the real owner of the yacht, a wealthy businessman Mark had been trying to impress, was alerted. The scene was chaos. Mark, caught in his lie, tried to explain, but it was too late. The businessman was furious. realizing Mark had not only used his yacht without permission, but had also attracted police attention, creating a scandal. The women on board quickly distanced themselves. Mark was left standing alone, publicly humiliated, his expensive shirt drenched from a spilled drink someone accidentally knocked over. He wasn't arrested for theft, as I had hoped, but the police did fine him heavily for various infractions, and the owner of the yacht banned him from his property and future events. More importantly, his reputation among the wealthy elite he so desperately tried to impress was utterly ruined. Just as the drama unfolded at the marina, the hospital staff rushed into Sarah's room. It was time for the emergency C-section. Hours later, I held my tiny, precious granddaughter in my arms. She was premature, but strong. Sarah, weakened but alive, was brought to recovery. She opened her eyes, saw me, and then saw her baby. A faint smile touched her lips. "Where's Mark?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. I looked at my beautiful daughter, then at her new baby, and made another decision. "He's not here, sweetheart," I said, a firm resolve in my voice. "He's not coming." I didn't tell her about the yacht immediately. I let her recover, focusing on her and the baby. A few days later, when she was stronger, I showed her the picture. She looked at it, her face draining of color, then tears welled up in her eyes. But these weren't tears of heartbreak. They were tears of clarity, of a deep, profound understanding. She didn't say much then, but I knew. When Mark finally showed up at the hospital a day later, looking disheveled and clearly having spent the night in a jail cell for public disturbance, Sarah refused to see him. She filed for divorce shortly after, citing emotional abuse and abandonment during a medical emergency. The yacht owner, still fuming, made sure word got around about Mark's behavior, and his big deals evaporated. He lost his job, his connections, and eventually his house. Sarah, with the support of her family, rebuilt her life. She found strength she never knew she had, and our granddaughter, Lily, is now a thriving, happy toddler. It was a terrible time, but it brought us closer as a family. I learned that sometimes you have to fight fire with fire, especially when your child's well-being is at stake. The guilt of lying to the police briefly nagged at me, but it was quickly overshadowed by the immense relief and peace I felt knowing I had protected Sarah from a man who clearly didn't deserve her. My daughter is happy now, truly happy, and that's all that matters to me. So, was I wrong? I still don't think so. I did what any mother would do, what any mother should do, to protect her child from harm, even if that harm came in the form of a negligent husband. Like this video if you were on my side in this whole mess. Subscribe for more stories like this, and please, share your final thoughts on this whole situation in the comments section below. I'll see you all in the next story.